I'm Oliver, and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. Another video. Thanks so much for watching the last few. I know it's only been once a month, but it's been great to get back on the horse again. If you want stuff in the meantime, in between monthly videos, I'm on Substack. I do a free post every Tuesday. I do a paid listening diary post every Friday, and also paid videos as well across the month. So if you want to check that out and hear what I have to say about brand new releases and interviews with artists like Mike Venart, who's just joined Cardiacs, and my favorite heavy records and my favorite ambient records, loads of other stuff, head over there. So I thought really long and hard about whether to do a massive guide for Frank Zappa. Like I really did kind of take my time thinking, is it doable? But even more so than any other artist I've covered doing those big guides, the intensity of his music, the artistic vision, the variation of the styles, I think would make it nigh on impossible to really cover all of his different music in one guide, maybe even two guides. Instead, I'm kicking off with a new style of video today, which is a bit of a halfway house between a 5 albums video and a guide, where I'm going to take some of the artists that have the most unwieldy discographies and introduce you to them with a bit of an intro, what they're all about, and also give you 5 records to start you on a journey to discover their music. As always, I'll take suggestions in the comments, but I mainly want to cover those artists that just have those huge discographies that most people sit down and go, where the hell do I even start? So, The Residents, The Fall. I've picked Frank to kick the series off because I think he's probably the most requested artist ever for me to cover. Across the decade of doing videos, that's the one that people come back to and go, I really want to get into his music. I had a DM last week even of someone just saying, actually, I'd love to get into his music. I have no idea where to start. Please do a video. I felt the same for a long time too. The thing is, you're missing out on a fearless innovator of the 20th century, a man who was impossible to box into any one style, and he was just as comfortable writing dense orchestral scores as he was penning smutty lyrics about arseholes. So without further ado, let's start. Who is Frank Zappa? And why should you care? Frank Vincent Zappa was born in 1940 in Maryland and didn't really care about music all that much growing up. Instead, he was more interested in making homemade explosives and running around the house wearing a gas mask like it was a space helmet. But he was into making films, making these home movies on Super 8 cameras with his family, and some of the footage looks like old George Romero zombie movies. He eventually caught the music bug, taking a particular interest in rhythm and blues music, but also the work of Edgar Varèse, who was a French experimental composer. Zappa talks about how the canonical classical greats, people like Beethoven, just didn't catch his interest at all. But what was fascinating to him about Varèse's music was how strange it was. That's what caught his attention. These two teen influences alone hint at the wild flux of his musical expression. By the way, if you want a beautiful insight into the man's childhood and the rest of his life, I really recommend the Alex Winter documentary Zappa. It's one of those dutifully pieced together films where the filmmakers assemble archive footage and resist interjecting on a personal level. It's a beautifully made film, and it also doesn't shy away at some of the complexities of the man and the fact that he was, sometimes quite hard to work with and perhaps not the best husband at times. He eventually founded the band The Mothers of Invention, or The Mothers for short, and released influential albums like Freak Out, Weasels Ripped My Flesh, and of course We're Only in It for the Money, which is mostly famous because of that parody of the Sgt. Pepper cover art. Eventually disbanding the Mothers at short notice because Zappa was finding it exhausting and didn't really enjoy the fact that people were relying on him financially through touring and things like that. He also just wanted a lot more freedom to create the music that he wanted to make. Producing the classic Trout Mouse Replica by Captain Beefheart, Zappa went on to create an instrumental fusion classic like Hot Rats, the double album Shake Your Booty, and the political rock opera Joe's Garage, or Garage if you're American. Comedy rock is often a term used to describe Zappa's work when you're reading about him. It's kind of a gross and ill-fitting way to describe the music that he made. Like he was some sort of proto-Weird Al Yankovic. Nothing against Weird Al at all. It's not really an accurate comparison. It's true that his lyrics often make you laugh or throw you for a loop, but for Zappa it was all about eliciting a reaction out of the audience. You might be shocked by a choice risque phrase in a song. You might be shocked by a 20-minute psychedelic blues wig out halfway through a live set. Here's a brilliant quote from the man himself that summed up his early approach to making music. It always seemed to me that if you can get a laugh out of something that was good, and if you can make life more colourful than it actually was, that was good. So any artist or individual working in those directions was doing something good. Delving deeper into much of his lyricism, and you'll find strong autobiographical links to his life, disdain for the country he grew up in, and also a white-hot political streak that never left him. And we haven't even touched on the bold decision to hire out the London Symphony Orchestra in the 1980s at the Barbican to perform some of his orchestral works. And the music's kind of lofty and dramatic, only in the way that 20th century contemporary classical music can be. And then you have his collaboration with German group Ensemble Modern, which culminated in this live record, which included an orchestral piece titled G-Spot Tornado. He was always surprising the audience and striving to make his next piece of music. And that is one definitive thing you can say about the man, right up to his death at the age of 52. And with that, let's take a look at the 5 albums to get you into the strange genius of Frank Zappa. Number 1, The Mothers of Invention with Freak Out, released in 1966. Where better to start than the beginning? This is the debut album of the Mothers of Invention, and it's a strange melding of blues, doo-wop, rock, big band, and otherworldly noises that brought Zappa to the world in earnest. Freak Out is one of those records that isn't just a definitive musical statement of the 1960s, but also of the wider 20th century, if you look at it in the context of the music that was made. I mean, famously, Paul McCartney has said multiple times that Sgt. Pepper was the Beatles' attempt to make Freak Out. Did they succeed? I think that's a discussion for another time. What is clear on your first listen to this batshit album is the washing machine of ideas and sounds that the band spins together across these 15 tracks. Kicking things off with the fuzzy Hungry Freaks Daddy, which has a Cream-esque vibe to it, you'd be forgiven for thinking that you just dropped the needle on a fairly conventional 1960s rock record, other than the fact the track is called Hungry Freaks Daddy. You'll also be treated to a very tasty early Zappa solo in the middle 8. Wading a little further into the record, and you come across the dark mulch of Who Are the Brain Police. Fuzzed guitars back vocals run through delay with this queasy chorus that seems to subvert the vocal harmony heavy pop of that era. But before you know it, the track explodes into this musical interlude and cuts through feedback and samples of unintelligible conversation. This is the kind of music that the band were trying out at their long residency at the Garrick Theatre in New York. In interviews since Zappa's death, his wife Gail talked about it being a place where he could be intimate with an audience. That really helped Frank to perfect what he could get away with on stage. So begins the subversion of expectations when it comes to Frank Zappa's music, and it's here in this very first record. Damn convention, don't waste your time trying to make it big or sing to the tune of the music industry. Make weird shit because you want to make weird shit. There's also a political element to the lyrics of Freak Out, as Zappa grappled with the free love hippie culture of the 60s and the hodgepodge of subcultures that grew out of that period. And yet he does it with that trademark wit that you'll come to appreciate across his discography. On You're Probably Wondering Why I'm Here, he lampoons the rich youth of America. Stomp all night and drink your fizz, roll your car and say gee whiz, you tore a big hole in your convertible top. What will you tell your mum and pop? A definitive musical statement. This is where it all started. This is where you begin. Number 2, Frank Zappa with Hot Rats, released in 1969. We're jumping ahead a few years now to the second Frank Zappa solo record and the first since the Mothers split. From all reports, it sounded as if he ran an incredibly tight ship with the Mothers, wanting everything to be note perfect. We'd go in for a minimum 8, 10, 12 hours. He wouldn't stop. It didn't matter if it was Christmas or Thanksgiving. We were going to rehearse and make sure we were ready to play the music because he was just writing all the time. It was a very unusual approach, I think. Not that that would change across the rest of Zappa's career. He would continue to demand the absolute best from the cycling cast of musicians that were in his orbit. I think that's the result of being someone who has an exacting vision of their art, refusing to compromise one iota to get there. This quote from the man himself sums up this near obsession of capturing that thing in your head, trying to distill an idea at its genesis. All I want to do is get a good performance and good recording of everything that I ever wrote so I can hear it, and if anyone else wants to hear it, then that's great too. Sounds easy, but it's really hard to do. Hot Rats is a good starting place for those of you who are inclined to enjoy a little bit of jazz fusion. The 6 tracks here revel in psychedelic wig outs, extended guitar solos, and ragged drum performances from a rotating cast of percussionists. Zappa produced this record with Ian Underwood, formerly of the Mothers of Invention, who played piano and the woodwind parts. The rest of the musicians were brought in to feature on specific tracks like Captain Beefheart's Tom Waits-esque vocals at the beginning of Willie the Pimp. Opening song Peaches and Regalia is often regarded as creme de la creme Zappa. Hard to disagree with that take as well, and it even became a live staple for him over the years. It's just a catchy, stomping instrumental track. Even without lyrics, it transmits Zappa's explorative vibe and singular style, leaning heavily on horns to pockmark a track that goes through so many different section changes in less than 4 minutes. On the near 13-minute long gumbo variations, Ian Underwood puts in a damn shift with his woodwind solos. Like, the man's a beast. An essential listen for any Zappa exploration. Number 3, Frank Zappa with Apostrophe, released in 1974. Prepare for a pretty sizable jump this time. Now we're landing squarely in the 70s with Zappa's 5th solo record. You might be surprised to discover that this is the point where our mustachioed musician found a little bit of commercial success. Apostrophe was a top 10 hit on the Billboard 200. No mean feat for an artist who clearly never gave a shit about commercial success and all of the trappings that are associated with it. We were already hearing it in Hot Rats, but at this point in his career, the level of musicianship on these records are really hotting up. That's not to suggest a record like Freak Out isn't musically impressive, just much looser than the music that he is now making. By the time we get to Apostrophe, every collaborator is on their A game, producing some incredible performances. The skill of his surrounding collaborators continue to be an important part of the music that he made right the way up to the end of his life. In many ways, Apostrophe is a perfect record to try and understand the comedic side of his work, brushing up against these virtuosic performances, and offers an inkling to why his discography can sometimes feel impenetrable. For those people looking at the big long list of records that he produced in his lifetime, where do you start? He's funny, but also he's really talented musically, and so everyone that he works with, what the hell is this guy? I think some of that comes out when you listen to Apostrophe, and some of it starts to make sense as you listen to Apostrophe. It's funny, tongue-in-cheek, satirical, but the music, the performances do not slouch in the slightest. The arrangements are deadly serious in their precision. You only need listen to Don't Eat the Yellow Snow, the first track on Apostrophe, to hear this. The 7/4 time signature, a quarter note drum beat by Ralph Humphrey that kind of swaggers across the track, and then you have Zappa introducing this story of Nanook, an Eskimo, correct parlance of our times is Inuit, who essentially gets angry with a fur trapper and decides to rub husky wee in his eyes, making him blind. The story drapes loosely across the 4 tracks, and I'm not really going to get into that now, but it ends at Father Oblivion, which is this furiously fast arrangement with snare-type performances of every single musician on that track. Other brilliant tracks include Cosmic Debris with that lovely gospel-flecked chorus, and Uncle Remus taking a break from the lyrical absurdity to focus on the state of race relations and the struggle of being a black person in America. We look pretty sharp in these clothes, yes we do. Unless we get sprayed with a hose, it ain't bad in the day if they squirt it your way, except in the winter when it's froze. A career-defining record and many people's gateway to the music of Frank Zappa. Number 4, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention with One Size Fits All, released in 1975. Just a year on from the last record, and we have a belter of a record from Frank and, as you heard from the title, the Mothers of Invention. Okay, I'm gonna say it. I think One Size Fits All is the best Frank Zappa record. Or do I think it's my favourite? I don't know, this is hard. When you start to listen to Frank Zappa and you start to see what other fans are saying, you'll realise that there is no one single answer when it comes to his best record. Everyone has a different take on it. So if there are any Zappa heads that are watching this thinking, what is this dickhead saying, talking absolute bollocks, come and berate me in the comments. I'd love to hear it. But yeah, I think for my money, One Size Fits All, it's the best. To backtrack slightly, even though the Mothers were disbanded after Zappa got fed up with the touring cycle and having to pay people's wages and just didn't enjoy it, a new version of Mothers was brought to life in the 70s, and then that became another outlet for Zappa's compositions. Across the 70s, some of his records were with the Mothers, some of the records were under his solo name, but don't get it twisted, no matter kind of what the umbrella is, the driving force and the heart of these compositions mostly were Frank Zappa. This is a good time to mention the brilliant George Duke, a keyboardist and songwriter and singer who worked on Apostrophe and then a year later contributed even more to One Size Fits All, even lending his voice for a handful of tracks. On working with Zappa, Duke said, One Size Fits All and Apostrophe, those albums were basically me and Frank in the studio for hours. I mean, it was just us and the engineer carrying the amp. We'd be there at Paramount recording studios or wherever, just recording from 1 or 2 in the afternoon until 5 or 6 in the morning. It was just basically running through synth patches, trying to find sounds that Frank would like, and by that time I understood what Frank was looking for. Duke wasn't all that excited about doing vocals, apparently, but the thing is, if you are a Frank Zappa collaborator and the man himself hands you a sheet and goes, I've written this for you, I'd like you to perform it. You best damn sure that you perform it, and you perform it well. We first hear Duke's voice at the beginning of this excellent record with Inca Roads, possibly one of the most complex and head-spinning tracks in all of Zappa's discography. Ruth Underwood kicks off with marimba underneath George's soulful vocals, and things feel as if they're on an even keel for a bit until all of a sudden the band rips into mixed time signatures, stabs of instruments, this ripping solo from Zappa, and some quite knotty, proggy passages. This is one of the best tracks in his entire discography. Seriously. From there, the quality never drops. From the near 8-minute Pajama People, which apparently is based on Zappa's boredom for some of the intellectualism of the collaborators that he was working with and touring with, and San Bernardino, a song about a love between two people, one of them called Bobby, whose head is shaped like a potato, which actually has quite a sweet message amidst all the piss-taking. Well, you might think they're dumb and lonely, but you're wrong, because their love is strong. Stacked up hair and a cheap little ring, they don't care, because it don't mean a thing. I love how infectious, musically intricate and funny this record is. Truly one of the best that Zappa ever made. Number 5, Frank Zappa with The Yellow Shark, released in 1993. For your final recommendation, here is something a bit different. I already mentioned Edgar Varese at the beginning of the video, and it was an early Frank Zappa inspiration, beginning his lifelong interest in complex orchestral scores. Indeed, he spent much of his life writing music for orchestras, but then failing to be able to get an orchestra to perform them. Obviously, when you've got that many people that you need to cover a day rate for, a performance rate, and rehearsals and things like that, that's a lot of money to spend. And so, that was prohibitive cost for him. Although at one point in 1983, as I mentioned earlier, he hired out the London Symphony Orchestra to perform some of his orchestral works. But despite receiving rave reviews, Zappa was apparently frustrated by some of the performance and the technicality of the recording. That perfectionist coming back in there, if everything's not note perfect, then he's going to have a problem with it. His frustration around not being able to get a record or composition perfect was not lost on his collaborators. Here's a quote from Steve Vai, the guitarist who was a collaborator of Zappa in the 80s. Frank was a slave to his inner ear. He heard things in a particular way and tried to manifest them in the world. But there were limitations. Then along comes Ensemble Modern, which is a German ensemble that expressed an interest in performing some of Zappa's compositions for some performances. They came over to the US to rehearse it. Zappa was very pleased with what they did. They then performed it in 1992, and in 1993, the recording of that was released as The Yellow Shark, which was released about a month before he died. It's a record often described as a perfect distillation of Zappa's 20th century orchestral writing. It's colourful, it's got depth, and it's a surprising collection of pieces, which is fully realised by this incredible ensemble performance. Outrage at Valdez is a personal highlight. You have the drama of the struck timpani and the strings and clarinet flitting around bells and tuned percussion. The Girl in the Magnesium Dress is another. These atonal darting passages performed by piano and also xylophones from Rainier Romer and David Haller. The track title that draws the eye most is, of course, G-Spot Tornado. It's a triumphant finale that bounces along right till the very end and then culminates in an explosion of applause, cheering and whoops from the crowd that was there. That standing ovation actually lasted 20 minutes during the actual performance. Doesn't go on for that long during the record, but you get the idea. Frank Zappa was diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer in 1990, and he died in 1993, aged just 52. And in that time, he made enough music and art to fill several lifetimes. Such was his passion and obsession for performing and creating and composing. You don't have to love everything. I don't love everything that he made. But exploring his music is like opening a door to a whole other musical universe. And you owe it to yourself to get stuck in. Thanks for watching this new video, this new series. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you like the idea of this new series, kind of that halfway house between 5 albums and genre guides. I'm going to do more of them in the future. As I've said at the beginning, if you want more of me every week, you can head to the Substack. Free posts every Tuesday, paid posts every Friday. Otherwise, I'll be back in a month with another video. See you then.